where we're meeting. The SLA board is meeting for our mid-year board meeting and conference planning session. And our guest today is Ivan Perone, Miami's own entertainment sports lawyer. Welcome.
Thank you,
Or
Bob.
should I say cheers?
Cheers. Thank you for having me.
Well, great to have you. And we have a great location here in Brickell. Is that where we're at?
Yes, we're in Brickell Avenue, the financial center and hub of Miami.
Great. Well, the way we usually like to start out our little show here is for our guests to talk about what their practice is, what their work is, and the path that they took to find themselves where they are today. So, floor is yours.
Sure. So I have my own practice, Perone Law, Entertainment and Sports. Started the practice back in 2006. My path has been a little different than the traditional lawyer. The law was actually a second career for me. I started actually as a software engineer in the dot-com world. Back in the 90s, I invented the first version of iTunes, the first online music store. Was very heavy into the tech sector for a while there, raised a bunch of money, signed the first digital deals with the music industry, all the major record labels. And then April 14th, 2000, the stock market crashed. And that was coupled with a company called Napster that came out and was giving away music for free. So I kind of got caught in a quagmire. I couldn't raise any more capital. So I had to do the most difficult thing of my life, which was let go of 200 employees at my company and kind of reevaluate our business model. And what we had done is we had aggregated about 500,000 rights to about 500,000 music tracks to distribute digitally on the internet. So we took those rights, and there was only 3 of us left in the company. We started sub-licensing them to AOL, Prodigy, MusicNet, Press Play, eventually Napster when it was legal, and got the company back to the black. But by then, Apple was launching iTunes, and there was no need for an aggregator in the market anymore. So I took the opportunity, the stars aligned, and I went back to law school. But my approach to law school was a little bit different. I having have been in the industry and in business, my approach was I wanted to take every single business class, intellectual property, sports, entertainment, all of the types of classes that I thought would help in the direction that I wanted to go. And I was hired by Universal Music Group before I graduated, and I went to work in-house there a couple of years. Working in business and legal affairs here in Miami. So I oversaw business and legal affairs for the U.S. Latin market, Latin America, Spain, and Portugal was kind of my market. Initially, I did a lot of music. Music was fantastic to learn the industry and how it worked and learning the language of the contracts. Being a transactional lawyer was really what it was all about. Eventually, they opened the door for me to get more involved in television, and I became the representative for Universal for American Idol, which was the reality TV series. And I started getting involved in drafting all of the contracts related to reality TV. Universal got involved in other reality TV ventures, so I got to the point where I could draft contracts for an entire show from A to Z. And so forth, and kept growing in that area. And then eventually I decided to open my own practice, left Universal. And at that time, it was 2007, 2006. That's when the reality TV was really booming. So I landed the Hulk Hogan family as a client. And Hogan Knows Best was one of the early pioneers in reality TV and started growing into that area and then getting heavily into the television industry. I came into contact with a lot of athletes and started working with Jeremy Shockey, who had played here at University of Miami and then went on to New York Giants and New Orleans Saints, and working with different athletes. At that time, I really was curious how professional sports worked and how it operated. ever since I was a little kid, I was the kid that would take the television set apart and the stereo apart just to see how it worked. So I decided to pursue the agent licensing route. I initially got the NFL license from NFLPA to learn about how CBAs operate and work within the leagues. Later on, I got the NBA one, and eventually the NCAA when they opened up their program. I was one of only 30 initially that got licensed by the NCAA. What that really did is it broadened my knowledge of how the internal mechanisms of a sports league, a sports federation, of a sports team, how it operated. That's really the direction that I wanted to go. So over time, I started to evolve. I had more and more athletes that I worked with, and I started working with teams and leagues and federations and so forth. Eventually, I ended up landing DIMAYOR, which is the Colombian national sports. It's the soccer federation for the country of Colombia, and basically, I found it one of the most exciting opportunities to happen. What had happened is television throughout the world, sports media rights in general, normally were owned by one domestic player within each country, foreign country, which was the case in Colombia, it was the case in Italy with Serie A and soccer and so forth. So basically, I came with a different angle and approach, which was basically separating domestic rights from international rights, and assisted them in spinning off the international media rights for the entire league. And then once we got the domestic player to do that, we took those rights and then took more kind of like a BAM approach, a BAM media approach, to get them to spin off their media rights into a new entity, and then approached international players that were interested in cutting deals.
What's really interesting about what you said, and I want to go back to the early part of it, is you began your career in business and building a business, not as a lawyer, as an entrepreneur. That really informs how it would seem to me anyway, because I have a similar background, that having been in business, it informs how you practice law, because you've seen certain pitfalls and you know, or have a better sense of how to draft a contract that will avoid some of the stuff that you had to deal with. So it seems that's a really important lesson. Especially for law students that may be watching, they often think, I gotta go to law school, I'm going to college, I'm going to law school. But sometimes that business experience, especially in a transactional practice, pays huge dividends. I think it has for you, hasn't it?
Most definitely. Being a good lawyer is not having a paper that says you're a lawyer. It's the experiences that come with it over time. And as I took a lot from the business world, being involved in understanding how business works and certain nuances and things. And the approach is differently. You don't look at everything strictly through a lens of what are the legal issues here. You have it's a balance of legal and business, because at the end of the day, as transactional lawyers, it's all about deal making. It's
Correct.
about getting the deal made and how to best serve whoever your client is and maximize their return while minimizing their commitment.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And sometimes you lose sight, and there's some misconceptions about what we do as lawyers, even to the lawyers that are watching, because we make the mistake of not realizing we can't always give our clients, they control the decision making. And we can say to our client, oh, well, this is my counsel. And they say, I want to do this. And sometimes you have to say to them, well, yes, we can draft a contract that says that, but if you do that, these are the consequences in the real world that may arise from that kind of language. And that's when your clients have the light bulb moment and they go, oh, really? But I think having had experiences in the real business world, not as a lawyer, helps you to see through some of those issues. And I think it really helps, and certainly has informed your practice, because as you said, you worked for a big company drafting all these agreements. You saw all the agreements. And then when you see a client outside of the big, I left big Mr. Murdoch's empire, and I took all that knowledge to be, sole practitioner. You took, the Universal empire, took it to be a sole practitioner, and you took lessons, but it's the Perone flavor gets put on those decision makings. And that's pretty much how you've been building your practice, correct?
Correct. Similar how I'm sure you have the hacker flavor.
Yeah.
It's all of those little nuances and those lessons that you learn over time and things that you spot. And when you it's all about volume. I remember and when I work with people that approach me for internships and so forth, or that ask, how can I get into this industry? What can I do? And my suggestion is always get your foot in the door to work in-house, whether it's a sports organization, whether it's an entertainment or media organization, whether it's a tech sector organization, whatever it is, get your foot in the door, because what it is volume. It's like learning a different language. And each of
Absolutely.
these businesses have their angles and things. And over time, you get a little eccentric, like I'm sure we both are, and you take little elements from contracts. I have concepts that I learned in music industry that I'll say, wow, why don't we apply that in television? Or why don't we apply that in sports? Or why don't we apply entertainment and sports? It's interesting. It's usually siloed. The lawyers are usually very siloed. There'll be a music lawyer or a television or a motion picture or a sports lawyer. And you gain a lot of knowledge being able to go back and forth and cross pollinate from all the knowledge.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think sometimes when you get siloed, and that is what generally I refer to as going through life with blinders on. This is what I do. This is what I do. But ultimately, we are trained as lawyers to argue by analogy. If there's, in the litigation space, if there's not a case on point, if there's not a statute that directly relates, what can we relate it to? And I think that exists within disciplines. So I cut my teeth during my tenure at Fox Sports, and I was doing what were, sports deals, on-air talent, producers, directors, getting the rights and whatever. And since the last 6 years, since I've been out on my own, it's production. I was a production attorney. I know how to hire trucks. I know how to put facilities together. I know what you need. And I've been doing entertainment work, doing TV movies and animation series and whatnot. The nomenclature may differ in small ways, but at the end of the day, it's still offer acceptance consideration, and then what else do you need to protect your client, and what have you learned? And I think you made a great point there. Why does what exists in the music world, why can't we use it in the TV world or the entertainment world? Well, you can, but that's because you've learned, which I think all the best lawyers I've ever known don't work with blinders. They got their head on a swivel, and is there a better solution? How can I solve this? And it's the old lawyer story about Ralph Nader's first case, where the GM guys were saying, well, this is how it's always been. And Ralph Nader saying, well, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way. And I think we can do that. And that's what's really interesting for me about the practice, is that there's always a new little maneuver you can make, a new little different view. And I think you get that view from being exposed to lots of different things in the legal practice.
Most definitely. I mean, the amazing thing, what I noticed in music after being involved initially in my career, that probably the most complex area was music publishing. That is
absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
That's one of the most complex areas of entertainment law, is to understand why 100% plus 100% equals 100%. It's
the craziest math. For those of you that have never been involved in it, just trust the both of us when we say, if you're getting into music publishing, find someone that knows it, learn from them, because the math never makes sense. As Ivan just pointed out, you've got 100% of this share and 100% of this share, which equals 100% of the total. And you would stop and go, well, that's 200%, but not in music publishing.
Correct.
And that's when you dig into it in other areas, you understand, oh, I see how that works now. If it was up to me and maybe my friend here, we might say, let's talk about this in other terms, but it's so entrenched and it has never changed as far as I can see.
Most definitely. And then what was exciting for me and why I loved the whole reality TV boom, that was an area that it was watching the law evolve in real time, because the initial contracts that you did were kind of a little more traditional short form, but the complexities of reality TV, the litigation. There, I think with Real Housewives, which I worked with 5 of the Real Housewives here in Miami, there was an incident with a suicide of one of the cast members in California, and how that opened up a whole HIPAA area, and where the contract jumped from a typical 30 to 35 pages to 80 to 90 to 100 pages, and just watching in real time, learning things. One of the other interesting things that I remember from reality TV was the provision with confidentiality, where if you broke the confidentiality, it was a damages provision that you owed the producer $1 million. I mean, those types of things. I'm like, wow, we can put a confidentiality provision with a penalty in it. And watching all of that evolve from all of these different areas as it was evolving, that was really exciting for me and what I really enjoyed.
Let me just add to that. From my experiences from watching my colleagues at Fox in the early days of reality TV, that Fox was all over, 2 trains colliding, great show. But what you didn't see, and the audience at home is watching people in these reality programs, and they're going, where did they find these people? They don't realize that there's hundreds of people that couldn't make the cut because they were doing background checks and going, nah.
Yes.
This we can't do. So the people that you see on reality programming have been vetted to an unbelievable level just to try to protect the company from A, being able to continue showing the program, and B, make sure they have an interesting show. So again, as lawyers, sometimes you get into a practice and you have to say, what are the issues I've never thought about? What are the issues that might come up? And it's almost like you're drawing a tree of sorts. And you say, okay, could this happen? What if they said that? Could that happen? Do we protect that? Is that a provision that we say, oh, you're disqualified from? But again, it's the no blinders approach. And just because this is how it's always been done, you point out perfectly, reality TV was a very different universe. And to use a standard production services agreement might not work anymore. And so we have to do that. So let's dig a little into your practice, because you've talked about how you've done some different things. There's a lot of acronyms that we deal with, a lot of initials floating out in the world. So let me walk through a few of them. And the first one I'd like to touch on is NIL. You got any of that going on in your practice these days?
Yes. So NIL is just like any other endorsement deal, really. I think, and having been, that was partially why I got involved and got licensed by NCAA initially. At the time, we didn't know what direction NIL was going to go. You knew it was the moving freight train coming, yeah, but we didn't know, was NCAA going to solely license agents to do so? But then you got the states involved, state by state involved with setting up a statutory situations. All the universities were doing their own thing, all of this with NCAA. I mean, at the end of the day, looking at the way NCAA traditionally treated NIL, I think it was always really more a policing issue. And that involved a lot more costs and almost impossible to police properly. And that was really the reasoning why they said zero NIL, trying to maintain a balance between all of the different universities and colleges and so forth. Now that it's kind of been opened up, it's kind of the Wild West a little bit right now still?
I'd say no, kind of. It's the Wild West.
It is, and just watching and understanding. I know that the NCAA just put out a clarification in the last week,
Right.
where they said that how a university can be involved within the NIL process. They can't technically sell the NIL, but they can identify the NIL and opportunities with NIL entities and so on and so
Sure.
forth. And it's really going to be an interesting way to see how things roll out. Because, I mean, I've always thought that college athletics has always been the most perfect public-private partnership ever. Because you have private universities and you have public universities that compete within the same sphere. And, now because you have public universities with public coffers and private universities that rely on boosters and tuition, it was a little bit, unbalanced. And the NIL can actually assist and kind of create a more balanced environment.
So, in the college space, we have a guest who may need attending to. Oh, we got that issue covered. In the NIL space, obviously, since Alston case, the NC2A was kind of emasculated. And so we have a situation now where, from you as a practitioner working in the space, you have whatever it is, 27 or so states that actually have NIL legislation. And all the other states it depends on what the conference or the university says that happens. So if there was a national standard, you would say, oh, let me look at the statute that the Congress has passed about what are the rules regarding name, image, and likeness. Because the NC2A can't issue them anymore post-Alston. Of course, we have no national standard. So unless you only want to deal with clients from the U, every time somebody comes to you, you have to say, what's the rule in the state? Are there no state rules? What does the compliance office say? How do I check in with the university? On the flip side, you have all these boosters groups that are booming in these sort of like these collectives they're called. How do you manage that on a day-to-day basis? And have you dealt with any of the collectives yet?
I have, and part of the clarification this past week, which was interesting, that the NCAA issued was if the NCAA identifies an infraction, what they have done is they've shifted the burden to the institution. So now the university will have to show that they are in compliance with the NCAA regulations related to NIL. And I mean, that's a big change. Again, NCAA is shifting the burden to them. And
Sure.
So it's really going to be up to each of the individual schools' compliance divisions and making sure that they maintain themselves. They put out information about it's really the university's responsibility to educate the student athletes on financial management, taxes, and so forth.
Yeah, that to me has always been, there's two issues that I think in this space, and we've talked about it a lot here on the show and in a lot of other places, but financial literacy education. I grew up when dinosaurs ruled the earth. And back in the day, when you were a senior in high school, there was a segment where they sort of taught you civics, but not just how you vote and how you do things, but what's a checking account? What are taxes? And that seems to be eliminated from curriculum these days. And I think you have these kids coming to college and they don't realize that, oh, I'm going to sign a $50,000 deal. They don't realize the implications of that. And I think financial literacy is important, and then making sure that these kids don't lose their athletic eligibility. Because the eligibility for, let's be real, the percentage of kids that go on from any level of collegiate sport to play professionally is a teeny tiny sector. And you don't want to be able to have a situation, where suddenly some kid loses his eligibility and his ability to get college education because he made a bad decision. So there's sort of a burden on the there's a sort of two-way burden on the university to keep the kids focused on what the rules are, and also to guide them to how to help them to make some money.
Yeah.
Now, collectives is sort of a new thing, and how it's going to operate seems to be on a state-by-state basis. And people talk. Florida was one of the first states to push out the NIL legislation, and there were things that were happening that you read about. Some company, every student on the football team is going to get this much money, and so on and so forth. It might not work in another state. So I think there's a lot of, national standards are great. I look at this, I see this, I plug it in. But practitioners working in the NIL space, you've got a lot of research to do and a lot of studying to do. Because a kid calls you from the University of Tennessee and says, hey, my buddy I went to high school with who's at the University of Miami said I should talk to you about NIL. Then you have to go, hold on a second. Oh, does Tennessee have a law? What's the Tennessee law? Or you have a chart on the wall that says Tennessee school, Tennessee legislation, or whatever the state may be. So it's all part of the underlying basis of what we do as practitioners, which is homework.
Yeah.
We'll do homework the rest of our lives because it's constantly changing. And I think in the NIL space, it's particularly tortuous. You can do it, and these kids can make money. It's just the how differs across the country.
Most definitely. And the interesting thing is that there's different players that are or by players I mean organizations or entities that are taking these efforts and trying to get involved. For instance, I represent a client, the Orange Blossom Classic, which is a historically black college and universities football game that's played here that was just revived in the last couple of years. And we have Florida A&M University that played Jackson State with Deion's
Coach
team.
Prime.
Correct. That played here
and
this year.
Against the best marching band in the nation.
Correct. Well, the fascinating thing, they had the Battle of the Bands here.
My former colleague Pam Oliver went there, and I always had to say that the best marching band in the world. FAMU is it.
They had a Battle of the Bands here at University of Miami on campus that week. I mean, it was a week full of festivities. But what was really fascinating is watching all of these other individuals and entities and players getting involved in helping the student athlete, in helping train them, in helping them with financial tools. They had an app that would help them build their credit over their college education so that they can eventually purchase a home. I mean,
that should be universal.
Yes.
That's the great stuff. And I think Coach Prime, with all of his people he works with, has really done that with the understanding to advance beyond. We're running low on time, but I got to talk to you about another couple of initials. NFTs. Now, you come from, a tech background and it makes more sense to you. Guys like me, I have these arguments with people. I say, I understand how it works. I understand the basics of what blockchain is. I understand the security and stuff. I don't get it on an emotional level. But NFTs is a booming sort of world. Your practice got involved in that at all?
Yes.
I like the shrug when you went yes.
Yeah, the interesting thing is the NFTs and the whole we're in a time right now that there's really a lack of understanding of all of these technologies and the impact that over time they will eventually have on everything as we know it. And to the degree that this is probably the biggest shift, the Web 3.0 shift is probably the biggest shift since the internet was created. I mean, we're talking, you as well as I remember when we worked on a computer, it was basically what's in the box. The computers were not connected to anything except what was on the computer. And it was only the internet and working and consulting in the mid 90s where, people had no idea what it was or the impact that it would have on our lives. And now we look at it as second nature. I really think a lot of this will evolve into that. What's happened is, we've had two players that have kind of gotten all of the media attention, which are cryptocurrency and NFTs like artwork as collectibles and so forth. and basically those are really two exploitations of the technology. They aren't
Right.
really the basics. It's a basis of technology, and that can be applied to many, many, many different areas.
Oh, I get it. Look, I'm a proponent of, if the world gets to smart contracts, we'd be in a pretty great place because of the security involved in those. But like you said, people talk about this and this, and when you talk smart contracts in the blockchain, they're like, what? But again, there's exploitations of the technology that we're barely scratching the surface of now. And because of that, again, it's another area where we as lawyers have to figure out, where does that fall? Where does that fall? Well, there's an IP element, and how do you protect that IP element? And, not to go far afield, but when you talk about Web 3.0 and an entirely deregulated environment, how do you police a deregulated environment? Talk about Wild West and NIL. I mean, that's a whole other discussion where we as lawyers are going to have to figure it out, because it's going to be coming fast and furious. When you think about the fact that, we're talking about the internet, there's only been broadband internet for 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we grew up with ping, 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 and pages loading like this on dial-up. And now you have a world where that technology is big enough. And in the sports space, why did Amazon finally get a deal? Years ago, I said Amazon was the next player. Broadband pipeline wasn't big enough to deliver enough concurrent, reliable streams. That pipeline's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Amazon has Thursday Night Football because technology, there's been an adaptation. And I think, technology helps drive us, but it also creates an area for when clients say, what do I do about this? You have to go, let me get back to you. And it's never a bad idea to say, let me look into this. I'll get back to you.
What it is, I mean, as humans, we tend to get enamored with the future and kind of move forward. But at least what I've recognized and understood over the years is it takes time for technology to be adapted and get to the point where all of these things that they say with smart contracts, it's true. We will get there. But, we have to, when will everyone own a wallet, a smart wallet?
Yeah.
It needs to be adopted. It's almost like, there was that time period when everyone said, oh, Netflix is going to kill Blockbuster Video. But Blockbuster Video hung in there another 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
The same.
Oh, by the way, everybody, Netflix used to be a little red envelope that you'd get in the mail.
Correct.
I mean, they adapted too.
Correct. And it takes an adoption stage of, 15, 20 years for things to really get in place. So that may be where the market is going, but that also opens up the opportunities for a lot of other businesses to get involved in the entire process as we move in that direction.
And for all you young lawyers out there, every one of those steps needs a lawyer to figure out how to do it.
Right.
And as you said early on, get some training and then take the lead. If you're happy where you are, great, but it's learning those skills and learning how to adapt them. And, sports is not a discrete discipline in the law. It's everything. So you can be a sports lawyer and touch upon it through a million different places. And the tech sector, whether it's what we were just talking about, or wearables, or the data for athletes, all of these areas make it really exciting place to be a lawyer. So, Ivan, thank you so much for joining me today. Sure. Thank you for welcoming me to your city, beautiful Miami. Really,
and I just have to say something that, and I've known Bobby now for a while, and I became a member of the Sports Lawyers Association years back. It's been over a decade, practically a decade now. And that's really, anyone that wants to get involved into the sports industry, this is really where you want to be, the annual conference. And I remember first walking up to you when I think you were you were incoming president so far, and talked to you and got to know you at a couple of conferences over the years. And that's really what it's all about, in meeting and networking. And I just can't think of a better organization than the Sports Lawyers Association. If this is where you want to be and you're looking for a starting point, this is where you want to go. You want to be at the annual conference. You want to get involved. You want to meet as many people, because these are the people that basically run this industry. And if you're a young lawyer and this is really what you want to do, this is where you want to be.
Well, my closing comments don't need to be said because they've all just been covered by my guest. So thank you all very much for tuning in, watching, and make sure we have tomorrow you still have time to sign up for our mid-year symposium on sports media. And the annual conference will be this May in Los Angeles, live and in person. And we look forward to seeing you. And again, my brother,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Really appreciate
Bobby.
this.
Appreciate it.
See you all soon.